Our speaker for today is Ray Johnson, who is an independent filmmaker, actor, and writer. He is Emeritus Professor of Film Heritage and Documentary at Staffordshire University and is Director of the Staffordshire Film Archive, a Director of the Media Archive for Central England, and former Director of Screen West Midlands. Ray's documentaries have been widely broadcast, and he continues to supply archive film material to television. His theatre work includes the West End, regional rep and touring, the Edinburgh Festival with a Fringe First Award, and the 1995 Royal Variety Performance. Ray is Vice President and Chair of the Arnold Bennett Society, a trustee of Claybody Theatre, a Fellow of the Film and Video Institute, and a long-service member of Equity. So I'll now hand over to Ray.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. This is, it's not a talk as such. It's not a PowerPoint. It's not a lecture. What I do is make films and use the information and construct a film which is self-contained, which has commentary, which is myself, input from various places. Certainly, the Staffordshire Film Archive always has input from interviews I've done, which I'm continually doing, and also in this case, as we've got someone who went from Staffordshire in the early years of the 20th century to Australia, emigrated. He was from a coal mining family in Silverdale, a coal mining town. He worked as a pit boy and then grew, and he was a young man when he emigrated. He'd already got involved in union activities for the conditions for the working miners and so on, and continued that when he got to Australia. He went to work in a coal mine in Australia. This is in the film, all the details and so on. And eventually, through his connections and working for his fellow workers, he got into a position where, in the end, astonishingly, he became Prime Minister of Australia. A pit boy from Silverdale. It's absolutely inconceivable, but he did, just before the First War. With the coming of war, the situation on Australia changed. He became a sort of foreign secretary, played that sort of role, and then after the war became the ambassador to Britain. He was a British ambassador for Australia. So did come back to this country, and did come back to Silverdale to visit, and particularly to visit the Primitive Chapel, the Primitive Methodist Chapel that he worshipped at as a youth. And where he was working in Australia when he first got there, a Primitive Methodist Chapel was established, which is still there and functioning. So what he did was for Australia. Australia was in a state of flux. Australia wasn't a mature country in the way that we would look at a lot of mature countries. We'd added to the mix in the 19th century by making it a punishment to be sent to Australia. It was a punishment to be transported to Australia. So there was a sort of population within Australia of ex-English people who now the descendants are still there, and they have a particular membership of that heritage of theirs. They're still there, and also the local heritage. You can't really understand someone's story going into another culture if you don't get some information about that culture at the time. And it was at the time, as I say, still changing, but the native Australians had their culture as well. And all these things were in a mix. So that's a kind of mix that Australia was, but also they were trying to develop Australia. Australia is a very big land, and so basic things like expansion and being able to grow crops to feed the expanding population out of the towns and cities and so on occupied him. And he was very important in developing particularly the growth of the staple crop of wheat for bread making, because the popular variations of wheat were tried and all failed because of the particular nature of the landscape, and crops were continually being flattened by high winds, flattened by high rains. And it was because the nature of the crop, which was a good yielding crop, but it had stems, stalks, which were too flimsy to support the head of wheat. So it was top heavy. It didn't survive the natural attacks it got. So he, working with a sort of nursery approach with a scientist, they developed in the end a wheat which had good cropping, but a stout stem. So it withheld those natural attacks that he got. And that became, to his and their credit, the international standard for wheat. What is the basic wheat that we grow? And it comes from that work in Australia with Joseph Cook and his collaborators. So, and the other thing he was doing was developing the communications network, particularly in telephony, in telephones, creating a telephone system, a telephone network beyond the center of the towns and cities into the larger area of Australia, and successfully establishing that, which was quite a struggle. But that's one of the other things he must be credited for. So he made his mark and successfully went through the war, and he did do important work during that first war, but then was given the ambassadorship. He was the British ambassador after the war, which meant he could come back here and renew his acquaintances and conclude his work here. Now, this is a film, and there's a lot of Australian material. And to make this film, I communicated with the National Archives of Australia, and they very kindly let me have footage which they could match with the story I was telling, and without making a charge, allowed me to use it. So I'm very grateful for that original material from Australian Film Archives to make the story really stand out. And so you get an understanding of things by taking it in, by going back into the day to get commentary on films, which was of the day. Or, well, actually, you wouldn't have had commentary on films at that time because they were silent films. But the kind of commentary from the Australian viewpoint. So you're getting my viewpoint in terms of him coming from England, and you're getting the Australian viewpoint on what was happening at that time. So hopefully that will lead to a good understanding of their culture and a good understanding as to what Joseph Cook did, what he achieved. There is only one piece of film that exists of Joseph Cook. It is about 3 minutes long, and it was taken when he had boarded a boat to give his last farewell to Australia, to come back to Britain to be the ambassador. And you see him with his family walking towards the camera. That is Joseph Cook in person, the only piece of film of him, and you're going to see it shortly. So I hope you go along with the story. I hope you enjoy that ride and find it fulfilling. And I'll be back with you the film is 27 minutes in length, so I'll be back with you there. Joseph Cook was born on the 7th of December 1860 into a mining family in Silverdale. His father, William, was a butty miner at the Silverdale Company's Hollywood pit. A butty collier was a master of men, leasing a coalface from the management and hiring and firing men as necessary. Maximum output at minimum cost, leading to dreadful working conditions and hazardous working practices.
He went to St Luke's School on a part-time basis, as was the custom to allow children to go to work. William and Margaret Cook encouraged their children in school. Work is the rent that you pay for your life, and only hard work would lead to success. At the age of 9, he became a pit boy at a local colliery. But with the Elementary Education Act of 1870, he was compelled to return to his school desk, returning to his old job at the big pit when he left at 12. In 1873, his father was killed in a mining accident at 39 years of age, and at 21, his brother Albert was killed in the Sheriff Colliery. Joseph was now head of the family and principal breadwinner at the age of 12, and grew to manhood with a highly developed sense of protective responsibility.
Alongside work of 10 to 12-hour shifts, he borrowed books from the local chapel to continue his studies himself. He chalked on pit tubs to improve his writing, spelling and arithmetic. In his late teens, he became involved in trade union work and honed his secretarial skills. In a period of depression and takeover of Silverdale pits, he left to find work cleaning and maintaining engines at the North Staffordshire Railway Depot at Wealdon Grove, Fenton.
He met Mary Turner, an assistant mistress at Chesterton Girls' Board School, who assisted him with his studies, and he visited the Turner household often. They were eventually married in Chesterton when he was 25. Mary had a brother who had emigrated to Australia, and his letters home told of employment prospects.
As more settlers arrived and as convicts continued to finish their terms, Australians were creating a national identity for themselves. They didn't want to be a colony of the British Empire. They wanted to have a government of their own. In 1901, Britain helped the colony become the independent Commonwealth of Australia. Its democratic government was based on a constitution that drew on both the American and British models. Australia kept its ties to Britain by recognizing the British monarch as its head of state. Today, Australians look back at their past with both pride and curiosity. The days of the penal colony are gone forever. But Australians remember the men and women who were forced to migrate to Australia on prison ships, who cleared the land and built the cities. They and their descendants remain an enduring part of every Australian's heritage.
They decided to emigrate. He went first to find employment and prepare a home for Mary, who was already pregnant. He went to Lithgow, New South Wales, where Mary's brother was, which had 4 coal mines. He began as a skilled worker at the Vale of Clwyd Colliery and built a house of timber nearby, which he called Silverdale.
In 1887, he obtained a part-time managerial post with a local newspaper, and in 1890, having acquired a good working knowledge of bookkeeping, he gained a part-time position as auditor to the local municipal council. He renewed his interest in trade union matters, eventually securing posts of secretary, then president at the Clwyd Colliery. His aggressive style of speech, developed in the pulpit at the Primitive Methodist Church in Silverdale and at debating society meetings, made him popular with the miners. And in 1889, he was elected General Secretary of the Western Miners Association. Coal was essential to the local economy. In 1891, he stood as Labour candidate for Lithgow in the general election, which returned 2 representatives to the New South Wales Legislative Assembly in Sydney. He generally pushed for the shorter working day of 8 hours for miners. He developed a panache for helping workers with their problems.
In 1894, he successfully stood as an independent Labour candidate, and when George Houston Reid of the Free Trade Party was invited to form a ministry, Cook was offered the post of Postmaster General. He was 33 and he held the post for 4 years.
First thing I did was to cut down the telephone rates and to popularise them, put them on a popular footing so that people were glad to purchase them and use them. At that time, there were only 2,000 or 3,000 altogether in use. I cut the rate down from a flat rate of £12 per annum to a flat rate of £5 per annum. That was inclusive of everything. The result was that a tremendous increase in the use of the telephone. Indeed, it seems to me, looking back, that they've never caught up since. It was not long before we had many, many thousands. And our difficulty, of course, was to keep up with the pressure. We did it, and today the telephone is in almost universal use. And another thing I did is project 3 long-distance telephones, one to Newcastle, one to Bathurst, and one to Goulburn. We constructed the one to Newcastle, and it began to pay from the beginning. And it was not long before there were no less than 4 lines carrying traffic to Newcastle. Then the other one was to Bathurst in the west. This did not pay at the beginning. By connecting up Lithgow and Toomba, that also became a paying proposition.
He expedited the installation of telegraph lines underground rather than overhead to take away a great eyesore. He introduced charity stamps and the first use of bicycles in the postal service. In 1898, there was a cabinet reshuffle and he was appointed Secretary for Mines and Agriculture.
Back in 1900, we were a farming and mining nation. 2/3 of us lived outside what were then quaintly called the capital cities. All through the 19th century, the government pushed farming to open up the country. It was usually cheap land. And once you cleared it, it was yours.
I left, of course, to go over to the mines and agriculture. And I was there for about 12 months. We had told our farmers to put in Steinwedel wheat, which was popular in Victoria and was a great yielder. I think they got 40 bushels to the acre out of it. And we told them to put Steinwedel wheat in New South Wales. That is to say, our department did. The wheat grew here just as it had done in Victoria. And we could have reaped our 40 bushels per acre as they did over there, but for one difference. And that was the different atmosphere in New South Wales. We told them, for instance, to put Steinwedel wheat into the pastures of the northern districts, up in the mountains where the stormy winds do blow. And they blew the wheat out and down upon the ground, and great was the fall thereof. And Mr. Farrar set himself as his first work the task of making a stronger straw to carry this prolific wheat. And his work became not only nationwide so far as Australia was concerned, but worldwide in character.
By 1900, he and Mary had 6 children. The Primitive Methodist Church in Lithgow was extremely active, and Cook, in addition to being a lay preacher, became a trustee of the church.
The Commonwealth of Australia came into being on January the 1st, 1901. Melbourne was chosen as the seat of government, and this moved to Canberra in 1927. The first elections were held in March, and Joseph went on to hold the Lithgow seat for 20 years. In 1908, he became leader of the government's opposition. By now he had 9 children and continued his preaching and obligations to the church. Government went into a period of coalition, and he was made Deputy Prime Minister to the Liberal Alfred Deakin and Defence Minister. In this role, he expressed his concern about Australia's vulnerability to the East after Japan's rapid rise in power, and advocated Australia developing its own naval force, at a time when major Western powers were finalising war mobilisation plans. He invited Lord Kitchener to Australia, saying, "Australia is the most distant, the richest, and, at the same time, vulnerable part of the British Empire." He wanted a new Australian naval squadron built and financed from Australian resources. Kitchener did visit, and afterwards recommended a military force of 80,000 troops for Australia's defences, as opposed to the 60,000 originally suggested, and a military college to train officers.
In 1913, the Liberal Prime Minister Deakin resigned owing to ill health. Cook stood and supported increased immigration, placing social services on a basis of national contributory insurance and reintroducing postal voting, among other issues. He was called to form a government. As a consequence, on the 24th of June 1913, he was sworn in as Prime Minister, also taking the Home Affairs portfolio. The former pit boy had attained the highest office in Commonwealth politics.
On August the 5th, 1914, it was his duty to announce, "I have received the following dispatch from the Imperial Government. War has broken out in Germany. All our resources on Australia are for the preservation and security of the Empire."
Greatest thing of all, of course, was the Prime Ministership at the time of the declaration of war. As a matter of fact, when I received an intimation of the declaration of war, I was addressing a political meeting at Horsham. I did not go to church on that fateful Sunday morning. What I did was to consult for about 2 hours with Mr. George Nibbs, the statistician, who I found knew more about Germany and their preparedness for war than any other man that I have ever discussed the matter with. I only need add with regard to this that I shall never reproach myself with what took place on the outbreak of war.
He directed Australia's war effort, putting him under great strain, often sleeping in his office and working 18-hour days. He remained Prime Minister for just 15 months, then returned home to the Balkan Hills to recuperate with Mary and the children. He was never to hold the post again, but he worked tirelessly for the rest of the war and his political career.
The landings are to have been at 2 points. The 29th Division at Cape Helles and the Anzacs at Gabatipi, with 2 false diversionary attacks. Put ashore a mile from their correct position, many Australians and New Zealanders are separated from their units. The losses are greater than those of the Normandy landings of the Second World War. Withdrawal is advised, but General Hamilton orders the troops to dig in. 8 months after the first enrolments, the Anzacs find themselves not smashing the European stalemate, but fighting the same stationary war with trenches facing enemy trenches, some roofed over as protection against grenades and mortars, making one at Lone Pine a death trap under howitzer fire later. Soon, any attempt at observation over the rim of the parapet attracts heavy sniper fire. To these hazards are added those of poor rations, incessant work, tension, and the disease brought by the flies you see here, all weakening the men. And so the campaign drags on without real success for either side. Only one roll of film is ever taken at Gallipoli, but in these scenes, that anonymous War Office cameraman shows graphically the conditions that exist there. In July 1918, when the Prime Minister visits the front, Monash meets William Morris Hughes in the Peron Square, while the official party is in this sector. This German 14-inch gun is still in the position in the RC Wood, from which it has shelled the railway station at Amiens before being destroyed by the retreating Germans on August 8th. Now, veterans of 1918 can at last be spared for Anzac leave, seeing home after 4 years of war. On October the 8th, 1918, Austria crumbles in the face of an Italian offensive. 18 days later, Ludendorff is dismissed. At Kiel, the German Navy mutinies. The army is forced back to Ghent, Mons, Mézières, and Sedan. The Kaiser's abdication is announced, and President Hebert offers a surrender based on Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Peace celebrations break out everywhere in Europe. As part of the takeover of enemy war plant, Australian airmen control this German base at Cologne. This enormous Gotha bomber will never fly. We see how light this captured British fighter is. Milking sheep is one of the activities found as troops move through Belgium as the rhythm of peacetime life resumes. Other activities are more traditional. Many European children have never known a real Christmas, and soldiers distribute gifts among them. The time comes for officers and men to say goodbye as battalions are broken into drafts. Along the old European roads, trucks carry homeward-bound men to rail points. Now is the time for piling gear, for stacking weapons. The AIF education scheme and non-military employment are the names given to the ways found to keep the men active as they wait for shipment back to Australia. General Haig and the Prince of Wales watch the final parades. They march past Americans, French, Portuguese, Italians, Japanese, Poles, Romanians. No other war is to make such a vivid impression on the Australian mind. Lloyd George and the royal family see them go. If the war's dead were to march here, their ranks would take 11 days to pass the saluting base. 60,000 Australians alone have died. Their lives have bought a legend which still marks every phase of Australia's life.
In 1918, Joseph Cook was knighted and returned to North Staffordshire to carry out a number of engagements. At Chesterton, he gave a passionate speech which he concluded, "We must combine all our forces and concentrate all our energies and stand shoulder to shoulder and blade to blade to conserve all that is best in our civilization. That is why I'm here, glad to come back to my ain folk, glad to meet so many friends of earlier years, glad to meet all interested in the development of this country and who are interested, as you all seem to be, in the development of the new land from which I come. Glad to be called a fellow citizen of this mighty empire, and glad to tell you that the men and women of Australia are resolved in their desire to fight with you for the successful ending of this war." The Sentinel reported loud and continued applause.
Following this, they proceeded in a car to Silverdale, and they followed the silver and town brass bands in a procession through the village, cheered on by school children who'd been given a half-a-day's holiday. As he arrived at the Primitive Methodist Church in the High Street, where he formerly had Bible classes, a small man popped out from the crowd and greeted him in a broad accent.
"Hello, Joe. Doesn't you know me? I'm Tom."
He spoke in the church, and the next day called at his old school, and at the Guildhall he was granted the honorary Freedom of the Borough. His return to North Staffordshire was a resounding success, and he was greatly extolled in the local Sentinel.
The Australian contribution to the war effort was honourable and considerable. At the signing of the peace treaty on the 28th of June 1919 in the famous Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, Joseph Cook was a signatory to the peace document. In Australia, he would contribute much support to the welfare of returning soldiers. He was made High Commissioner in London in 1921. His wife was made a Dame of the British Empire in 1925. And his term of office as High Commissioner came to an end in 1927. On his last departure from Britain, he thanked everyone who'd made his stay here so pleasurable. He said, "I do not like leaving London behind me. I cannot understand anyone who does."
On the dockside at Tilbury, he and his wife set sail. Their friend, Dame Nellie Melba, sang to them the Scottish anthem, "Will ye no come back again?" In July 1947, he was taken ill at home at Bellevue Hill, overlooking the magnificent Sydney Harbour Bridge, and after 3 weeks he died of a heart ailment. He was 86 years of age, and his wife was now senile. He had a state funeral in Sydney on August the 1st. Dame Mary survived her husband by 3 years.
John Shenton, his Bible teacher and friend, said of him, "From the fingertips to the end of his toes, he was all polish, but he was genuine, and I don't know that I ever met a more genuine man in my life." Sir Joseph Cook, 1860 to 1947, Silverdale pit boy to Prime Minister of Australia.
Are we waiting for anybody else?
No,
only yourself.
Have we told them to go outside for a reason?
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for turning up for this. It is very important that we recognise our sons of the borough for what they've achieved, and from Bittman to Prime Minister, you can't achieve much more in the political circle as a few of us here will testify. So it's not only the sons of the borough that become famous, but it's people like Graham, the Civic Society, Staffordshire Union, that also root these out so that we can remember them, that they're not forgotten in history. And this is number 19, I believe, for the Civic
19th,
Society.
yes.
So we've done well. We can do better. I'm sure there's plenty more. But again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Graham, for doing this. Civic Society, Staffordshire Uni. It's a pleasure to be here. I haven't got anything to pull, but this is it. What we'll do, we'll knock on the door and we'll all have coffee. So, thank you again for coming.
We need more about women. There were lots of important women in Newcastle and in Silverdale, and it's about time we acknowledge them as well.
And we've got one standing here, haven't we?
Well,
and another one there. Come on, Sam. I mean, come on. Can't have two more important women than these two.
Of course, yeah. And he's credited with having. I think this is a great day, and that the Dalings have at last managed to achieve a blue plaque on this property, marking the achievements of Sir Joseph.